Isaiah 3 isn't about Babylon or Rome. It's about foundations crumbling while facades still stand. In a moment, Isaiah shows the supports removed, leaders stripped, and beauty turned to shame. And why even in judgment, the remnant is preserved. Eden in reverse, Babel rebuilt, Egypt turned inward. Let's go inside the collapse and find the rock beneath it. Isaiah 3 isn't about Babylon or Rome. It's about a nation that undoes itself from the inside. What happens when a people built on covenant abandons its foundation? And God removes the supports, bread, water, leadership, wisdom. In Isaiah 2, we saw nations stream to Zion, even as humanity hides from the light. The plowshare promise sits beside shattered pride. Now the lens tightens. Isaiah moves from cosmic panorama to intimate collapse. He isn't predicting random tragedy. He's announcing the activation of ancient covenant curses from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. This is Eden in reverse. Knowledge without wisdom leads to spiritual death. It's Babel rebuilding itself into ruin, human pride constructing its own confusion. It's Egypt's oppression turned inward, where the soul becomes both master and slave. When God withdraws his sustaining hand, the spiritual order that upholds the physical world collapses. Children rule because the soul's higher faculties, wisdom, reflection, restraint, have been dethroned by its lower impulses. Appearance replaces character because the inner light has been extinguished. Leaders devour the people they should protect because the divine image in humanity has been obscured. Question for us: what does a nation look like when blessing turns to curse? And what does a soul look like when it abandons its foundation? When the Spirit withdraws, something rules in his place. What takes the throne? Verse 1 begins the dismantling. For behold, the Lord of hosts, removes from Jerusalem and from Judah support and supply, all support of bread and all support of water. This isn't recession, it's removal. The scaffolding that holds a people together, bread and water as body and soul, comes down by decree. Bread symbolizes the divine word that nourishes. Water, the flow of divine wisdom that sustains life. When a society severs its connection to divine truth, even physical matter responds. The universe operates on spiritual laws. When the spiritual foundation crumbles, the material world reflects that collapse. This is measure for measure justice operating at the deepest level. Leviticus 26:26 warned of the staff of bread broken. Isaiah announces, the warning is now reality. They rejected the bread of life, so physical bread fails them. They spurned living water, so even wells run dry. The soul that refuses spiritual nourishment eventually loses the ability to sustain physical life. Verses 2 and 3 reveal the scope of collapse. The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder, the captain of 50, the dignitary, the counselor, the skillful craftsman, and the expert in incantations. Every pillar, strength, judgment, wisdom, experience, guidance, is pulled out from under society. But these aren't just social roles. They represent the soul's faculties. The mighty man is inner strength. The judge is moral discernment. The prophet is spiritual perception. The elder is accumulated wisdom. When the soul abandons divine order, these inner capacities fail. The mind loses its ability to judge truth from falsehood. Spiritual perception dies. Even natural intelligence becomes confused. Deuteronomy 32:28 speaks of a nation void of counsel. But this describes not just political chaos, but the soul without its inner compass. unable to navigate between good and evil, truth and lies. Babel returns, form without foundation, speech without sense, power without purpose. Verse 4 shows the inversion of order. And I will make boys their princes, and infants shall rule over them. This is Eden's order completely inverted. In paradise, innocence was guided by divine wisdom. Here, inexperience governs without wisdom. The soul's lowest impulses, immediacy, appetite, emotion, tyrannize its highest faculties. Reflection, restraint, long-term thinking. Verse 5 reveals the result. People will oppress one another, everyone against his neighbor. The young will treat the old with contempt, and those of low character will insult those who deserve honor. When you see a society where impulsive decisions dominate thoughtful deliberation, where immediate gratification overrules long-term consequences, you're witnessing this prophecy fulfilled. Where impulse outruns wisdom, headlines outvote history, and appetite overrules accountability. There, Isaiah 3 is visible. The child self, meant to trust the parent self, instead becomes the tyrant. The result is mutual oppression, neighbor against neighbor, every person becoming everyone else's oppressor. Even the tender-hearted turn cruel. This is Egypt's oppression made universal and self-inflicted. The measure-for-measure principle operates precisely. They showed no mercy to the vulnerable, so mercy vanishes from their society. They dishonored the divine image in others, so human dignity disappears entirely. Verses 6 and 7 paint a scene of desperate refusal. One man will grab his brother in his father's house and say, "You have a cloak, so you be our leader. Take charge of this heap of ruins." But on that day the brother will protest, "I cannot heal your wounds. In my house there is neither bread nor clothing. Do not make me the leader of the people." Leadership becomes wardrobe, not weight. The possession of a cloak, outward respectability, becomes the sole qualification for rule. But even those chosen refuse because they recognize something deeper. The nation's collapse comes from God, and human solutions cannot heal divine judgment. This portrays the soul's condition when separated from its source. Responsibility becomes a burden because without divine connection, there's no power to heal or restore. The soul recognizes its own poverty and refuses to pretend it can save itself or others. Panic and powerlessness spread because the spiritual foundation that once gave confidence and strength has been removed. When the soul loses its connection to divine power, even its natural capabilities fail. Verses 8 and 9 expose the root cause. Jerusalem has stumbled, Judah has fallen, because their words and deeds oppose the Lord, defying his glorious presence. Their very faces testify against them. They parade their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them, for they have brought disaster on themselves. This reveals the ultimate spiritual tragedy. In Eden, Adam and Eve felt shame and hid their nakedness. Shame was the soul's early warning system, protecting human dignity. Here, that protective barrier has been destroyed. The conscience, meant to be the soul's guardian, has been seared. This is not just moral decline, but the death of the soul's capacity for self-correction. The face testifies, countenance becomes courtroom. When people openly celebrate what should cause sorrow, when they boast of what should bring repentance, the last barrier between civilization and chaos has fallen. They defy God's glorious presence, so his presence withdraws. They reject divine order, so disorder consumes them. This is measure for measure at its most precise. spurning what was meant to save them, brings the very judgment they could have avoided. Verses 10 and 11 provide divine balance. Tell the righteous it will go well with them, for they will eat the fruit of their deeds. But woe to the wicked, for it will go badly with them. Their own hands will bring it back on them. Two verdicts, no middle ground. Even in societal collapse, the spiritual law operates with perfect precision. Sowing meets reaping, measure for measure, individual destiny determined by individual choice. But notice the glimmer of hope. Even in collapse, a remnant is preserved. These are souls that maintain their connection to the divine source when disconnection seemed universal. Their inner light remained lit when external lights went dark. Hope isn't an epilogue. It's in the engine, the very law that judges also preserves. The same law that brings judgment on the wicked ensures protection for the righteous. This reveals that judgment is not God's abandonment, but God's precision. Evil is isolated so good can be preserved. Verse 12 reveals leadership perverted. My people, infants are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, your guides mislead you, and they swallow up the course of your paths. The inexperienced and unqualified assume power, while true guidance is lost. But this operates on multiple levels. Politically, the unwise rule. Spiritually, false teachers lead souls astray. Psychologically, the soul's lower nature guides its higher nature. Leaders who should protect instead exploit, consuming the very path the people should walk on. This is the soul devouring its own future, destroying the very foundations it needs for growth and flourishing. When divine order collapses, chaos seeps into every sphere: political, spiritual, psychological. The hierarchy flips, the map eats the road, the guidebook edits the mountain. Verses 13 through 15 shift the scene to divine trial. The Lord takes his place to accuse. He rises to judge his people. The Lord enters into judgment against the elders and leaders. It is you who have ruined the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people, by grinding the faces of the poor, declares the Lord of hosts. The judge rises and becomes present tense. The very elders who should have been gardeners of the nation's soul are accused of consuming the vineyard, exploiting the people they were meant to nurture. But notice the mercy embedded in judgment. He calls them still my people. Even in verdict, covenant language remains. This is not rejection but correction, not abandonment but intervention. The vineyard represents both the nation and the individual soul. God's cultivation meant to produce the fruits of righteousness. When the gardeners become parasites, the divine gardener himself must intervene. Justice is not God walking away. It's God stepping in to protect what remains and restore what can be saved. Verses 16 and 17 focus on the elite women. The Lord said, "Because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks, glancing wantonly with their eyes, mincing along as they go, tinkling with their feet. Therefore, the Lord will strike with scabs the heads of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will lay bare their secret parts." The daughters of Zion represent the soul's relationship with beauty and appearance. Their haughty steps symbolize the soul intoxicated with superficiality while inwardly corrupted. This is the Tower of Babel in miniature, elevation through external display rather than inner transformation. Their outstretched necks and wanton glances reveal hearts turned from divine beauty toward created beauty. They seek to be seen rather than to see truly, to attract rather than to reflect divine glory. This echoes Eden's fall. Eve saw the tree was pleasant to the eyes and desired to make one wise. External beauty divorced from divine purpose becomes the path to spiritual death. The soul, meant to be adorned with divine virtues, justice, mercy, humility, truth, instead decorates itself with material symbols of status. Inner beauty that reflects God's image is abandoned for external beauty that reflects only human vanity. Verses 18 through 23 catalog their treasures. In that day, the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets, the headbands, and the crescents, the pendants, the bracelets, and the scarves, the headdresses, the armlets, the sashes, the perfume boxes, and the amulets, the signet rings and nose rings, the festal robes, the mantles, the cloaks, and the handbags, the mirrors, the linen garments, the turbans, and the veils. Isaiah lists every piece of jewelry and luxury they wore and declares, all will be stripped away. Each ornament represents a misplaced trust, a false source of identity and security. Verse 24 completes the reversal. Instead of perfume, there will be rottenness, and instead of a sash, a rope, and instead of well-set hair, baldness, and instead of a rich robe, a skirt of sackcloth, and branding instead of beauty. Adornment becomes indictment. Perfume curdles to stench. Sash becomes noose. The rope replaces the sash, bondage replacing freedom. They chose slavery to appearance. Now appearance enslaves them. The soul that should have worn the garments of salvation wears the rags of spiritual poverty. This is measure for measure justice at its most precise. Fragrance becomes stench. Elegance becomes degradation. Beauty becomes disfigurement. What they exalted themselves in becomes the source of humiliation. Verse 25 strikes at national defense. Your men shall fall by the sword, and your mighty in battle. Security fails at the very point of confidence. The sword represents not just enemy aggression, but divine judgment, covenant vengeance for broken faith. The soul's defenses, its natural strength, its accumulated wisdom, its protective barriers, all collapse when the spiritual foundation is removed. Strength without source is scaffolding in a storm. Verse 26 closes with haunting imagery. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she, desolate, shall sit on the ground. The gates, centers of justice and governance, mourn because leadership itself has failed. Jerusalem is personified as a woman reduced to desolation, sitting in the dust. This is not only national humiliation, but the Spirit of God itself in exile, sitting low with fallen creation. The divine presence that once filled the temple now mourns with the ruins. Yet even here, the image carries hope. Sitting in dust can be the position of mourning, but also of repentance. The lowest point can become the starting place for return. Dust is not only ending, it's planting ground. Return begins low. Isaiah 3 is a mirror for every nation. Remove God, and the supports collapse with him. The lowest impulses rule. The highest aspirations starve. This is Eden in reverse. Babel rebuilt for confusion. Egypt's oppression turned inward. But judgment exposes illusions, so truth can heal. When false foundations crumble, the true rock is revealed. When external supports fail, the eternal foundation endures. The imagery closes with Jerusalem sitting desolate. But desolation can become the soil of renewal. The Spirit of God in exile yearns to return, waiting for hearts that will receive the divine presence again. The ancient curses reveal spiritual laws as unchanging as gravity, but they were written alongside promises of restoration. The false foundation has crumbled not to destroy, but to reveal the bedrock beneath. Next time, hints of renewal begin to rise. When human foundations fail, the eternal foundation endures. I want everyone to understand Isaiah, so let me know in the comments if there is a verse or phrase you didn't understand, and I'll clarify it for you.